Hi everyone. So my name is WinterRose84 here on YouTube. My name is Renee, and today's video is slightly different to my previous ASMR whisper type videos. This video will be in a softly spoken style. My setup, as you can tell, has changed a little. I wanted to try something new for this video. So around me, I've put up some blankets. That way, hopefully, it will help reduce the echo in the room. Fingers crossed that it works. So for this video, I wanted to try something new, and it's going to be in the style of a storytelling video. I wanted to share a bit more about my life and my childhood growing up, and hopefully some of you find that interesting. I also wanted to try something a little different again, and at the same time I'm going to be burning one of my favourite candles. This particular candle is by Woodwick, and the candle has a wooden wick at the top. This candle is vanilla bean, caramel and biscotti, and it smells like a bakery. It's smooth and very sweet, and it's just nice and relaxing and comforting, and I really enjoy it. When you burn these Woodwick candles, they also make a crackling noise. So hopefully you enjoy the sound of the crackle from the candle. It's similar to the sound that a fireplace would make when you're burning wood. So if you enjoy the video, please let me know. If you don't like the crackling of the candle, that's okay. You can provide that feedback to me as well, but I will be filming another video with a similar theme to this, possibly even sharing some of the same details without the crackle candle. So if you would prefer a video without the candle, I will be uploading one of those as well. Hopefully you enjoy this and you can sit back, relax and listen to my voice as I share more details about my life. You can watch along. Perhaps you may find the flicker of the flames from the candle calming, or close your eyes, listen to my voice and just relax. So to start with, I'm going to light my candle and then share my story with you. So now that the candle has been lit, I'm going to share with you my story and share some of my experiences when I was a child, and we'll see how far I get. So as most of you will be able to tell from my name here on YouTube, I was born in 1984. When I was born, my parents lived in southwest Sydney, in that region, and that's in Australia, New South Wales, Australia. My parents are both Australian also, and were born in a similar area as I was. I don't really remember very much of the first house that we lived in. I was very young when we moved, and when I was a child, we moved around quite a lot because of my dad's job. I didn't mind. It was something that seemed normal to me as a child. And in a way, while I don't have many friends that I've known from young childhood, I certainly appreciate the experiences that I had and the things that I was able to do and see as a child. Some of the things I got to do and see, there are few people that get the chance, and so I'm still thankful for the childhood that I had and for how hard my parents worked to provide that for me and my brother. So my brother, he is 3 years younger than I am, and before he was born, we'd moved to Queensland. So we moved to the suburban area in Queensland. This was around the time I was 3, so it would have been in the late 1980s. And for some of you, that may sound like a long time ago, but to me, it still doesn't seem that long ago. I still don't have that many memories from Queensland. I was 3 when my brother was born and when we lived in Queensland. When I see photos of our house, I still remember certain things. I remember small details, but I don't have a lot of memories from before I was 8 to 10 years old. I don't know if that's because we moved a lot, or that I simply just don't remember. Certain things will come back to me from time to time, but I don't have too many memories that I can recall without some form of prompt, like a photo or someone telling a story to me. But when we moved to Queensland, my brother was born in Queensland, and we lived there for a while, and I remember some things about that house. I do have memories from that house and the neighbour that I was friends with, and also other friends I had around the neighbourhood. I remember the smell of the sugarcane when they would harvest the sugarcane, and the smell that it made when they burnt the sugarcane. It was a sweet, smoky scent. I also remember the cane toads. They're large, ugly cane toads. My brother and I used to throw them over the fence when we were young. At the time, there was vacant land around us, so we would throw the toads from our yard into the land around us. I remember I went to preschool. Now, because I've lived in a lot of places, they call this something different in different areas, but by this stage it would have been in the very late 80s to around 1990. I think it was late 80s though. It's what you go to before you start primary school. That will change depending on what state you live in. Some states have prep, other states have preschool, some states have kinder or kindergarten. But in this case, this was something I went to before I started primary school. And I remember that they used to have an activity day, like a fete, you might call it. And there were water slides, so a piece of plastic that they would put on the ground and cover it in some form of liquid soap and make it really slippery. And they would wet that, and we would run along and slide. You don't see that in very many places these days. It is considered to be a little bit dangerous. And it was, but that was normal at the time. I remember the weather. It seems now that Queensland, even Sydney, New South Wales, feels more humid than I remember as a child. But I remember it being very humid. I remember parts of the house we lived in, and there's memories of my brother and I playing underneath the outside covered area, so the awning, or in a cubby house in the yard. I remember that in a photograph, for some reason, I had tipped yogurt on his head, and I also remember pushing my brother around in a cardboard box down the hallway, and he was quite young at the time. We then moved to the suburbs of Melbourne, so that is in Victoria. So we ended up going from where I was born in New South Wales, which is in the central part of the east side of Australia, up further north to the Brisbane area, and then down to Victoria. And that is where I started primary school. So going from Queensland, which is a more tropical temperature or environment, it's warm, the winter doesn't really get too cold, and the summers are very hot. We moved to Victoria, where the winter was very cold and the summers weren't as hot, and it's not as humid either. The house we lived in had vents that would heat the house, so the warm air would come up from the vents in the floor, and that was not something that my brother and I had seen before. I remember that we used to sit on top of the vents when it was cold, and my mother didn't like that, but we did it anyway. In our house in Melbourne, we had a backyard that had a giant apricot tree. Because of the climate in Victoria, in this area, it was a good environment to grow apricots. And I remember we used to climb the tree and pick the apricots. We would also have another tree in the yard, and under the tree we had a cubby house. There was also a vegetable garden where my brother and I would pick the peas and eat them straight out of the pod, and then we would throw away the pod because we didn't want the pod, just the peas inside. Occasionally we would take some vegetables or some leaves from the vegetable plants and bring them inside the cubby house and either create food or experiments with some of the vegetables and food. So sometimes when the strawberries in the vegetable patch were fruiting and were ripe, we would eat them straight out of the garden, and there wasn't many left. But I did enjoy having that vegetable garden. I also remember the front garden. There was some flowers that I liked. They were tiny, small, white, lacy flowers, and I don't know what they were, but they were very small and delicate and looked like lace. I remember going into kinder, or it may have been called prep or preschool, and this was in 1990. My brother wasn't in school yet, But when I went to school, he had to start talking to my mum, because before then he would only talk to me. And looking back, that was probably because I told him to. We were both quite cheeky as children. But it was okay. I did have some friends that I made in preschool or kindergarten, and I went to school for that year. There isn't too many other things I remember, but I do remember some birthday parties that I had, or a birthday party at the house. I also remember a tea party that I had in the yard, and this particular tea party stood out to me because I was with my stuffed teddy bears and probably my Barbie doll, and a giant wasp flew up, and it was the biggest wasp I had ever seen, and I remember it. And I remember going into the house and telling my mother. The other memories from that house are mainly to do with the backyard and the apricot tree, which I wish I had now. After we lived in Melbourne, my dad got a job overseas, and this particular job took us to Papua New Guinea in Port Moresby. So we were there, or we were meant to be there, for 3 years. This was in 1991. So we moved to Papua New Guinea, and that was very different to Australia. It was not uncommon to have no electricity for several weeks, and occasionally no water because it would be turned off. Where we lived in the first house was a group of units, and there were guards stationed at the unit blocks. This was not uncommon for what are called expats or expatriates, people living in New Guinea from overseas. I understood a lot as a child, even though I was only around 6, turning 7. My parents had taught my brother and I about safety and about being aware of our surroundings, and I thank them for that, because I think it was very important. In Papua New Guinea, things were different, and in the early 90s, It wasn't as bad as what it is like now, but it was still a dangerous place compared to other locations. My parents would have been younger than I am now when they lived there, and I can't imagine being my mother's age living in Papua New Guinea with 2 small children. So I appreciate everything they did to provide a good life for us and to make sure we were safe. Even though it was a different place to grow up, where there wasn't much takeaway food at all. There was no McDonald's. The only takeaway they had was something similar to what we have in Australia called Red Rooster. They had Big Rooster. There was a rumour and a sign that a McDonald's was being built, but that never happened. I remember on the main road near the beach in Port Moresby, there was a pizza place and they made good pizza. They also had a pond at the front of the restaurant that had small turtles. My brother and I would like to sit there and watch the turtles. There was also I think it may have been a petrol station, but it was a diner and it served similar to American diner style food. It really wasn't very good, but we didn't have much to choose from. I remember I went to a few schools and ended up going to a school that was near the beach. I did meet a few other people there and made some friends, and they lived in all different places around the world, and they probably do now too. We moved from our first house to an apartment building. This also had security, but we had a pool, not just ours, but for the whole complex. I remember when we had no water, we would walk down the driveway to the pool and fill up our pots. My mum would then heat the water and pour it into the bathtub so we could all wash ourselves in warm water. And that was not uncommon. Occasionally, we had to have a guard out the front of our apartment block because there were threats from, they called rascals, trying to get in to the complex. They would have machetes, so large knives, and they would try to get in over the tall fences. It was not uncommon to have large fences with barbed wire across the top in a lot of these places. I remember the flowers in Papua New Guinea, the bougainvillea, I think it may be called. It was spiky and dark green, and the flowers were thin like tissue paper, but they came in many colours. So white and pink. There may have been purple as well. And hibiscus flowers. They were very common too. I remember we would frequently visit the islands off the mainland, and these were some of the most beautiful places I had ever seen, and snorkel where there were fish and turtles, and it was just very, very beautiful. I also got to visit the Kokoda Trail. There was a park that we would go to and picnic as a large group, and that was up near the Kokoda Trail, and that is something that I am very thankful for, because not many people get that experience. I remember they used to have large lookout towers that were made from wood, and they were really tall. My dad and my brother would go up, but my mum didn't want me to. They were very tall and sometimes not quite safe. On one of the picnics that we had, my brother and I found a large snake skin, and we brought it back to show my family. It was just lucky that we didn't find the snake. I remember one visit to my dad's office building in Port Moresby. Outside of his window was a giant bright green snake. So that was interesting. There were a lot of different things that you would see, and they just became normal at the time. There was sometimes that it wasn't safe to go to certain areas, and also certain places after dark. But you were used to it, so it really didn't seem that bad. We were meant to be there for 3 years, but in the 3rd year, or just before that was up, my mum, my brother and I had to leave. Things were very dangerous, and we had been threatened. So we left overnight on a plane back to Australia. I remember having to pack and the next morning I got to say goodbye to my best friend, but then we left. My dad still had to stay to finish his contract. So my mum, my brother and I lived in Queensland until he could come home with us. So when we moved to Queensland, we were in a small unit block with my mum, and I remember out in the units there were macadamia nut trees, and my brother and I would collect the macadamia nuts and put them on the driveway and try to crack them open with bricks. If you've ever tried to crack a macadamia nut, you'll know how hard it is. But we would like to crack them and eat them fresh. My dad was still overseas at this time, and being older now, I can only imagine how difficult that must have been for my mum, but also my dad. My dad ended up coming home, but another reason was that one night my mum woke up and thought that my brother or I were downstairs getting a drink, or had opened the fridge because there was a light that she could see. She checked our room and we were both in bed. When she went downstairs, she realised that the front door was open. Her handbag was open and things were all over the place, but it looked like she may have disturbed the people and they weren't there anymore. It turned out that several of the places in the block had been broken into that night. And this was not a bad area, it was just unfortunate. But my dad came home because I think it was just too much in the end. And I can understand that. He then had the opportunity to either go overseas to Hong Kong or to move back to Sydney. And as a family, we decided to stay in Australia and move back to Sydney. So this was in late 1993. So all of this happened in quite a short period of time. During this time, we had gone on several holidays to Cairns in Australia, the Great Barrier Reef, but also back and forth between Sydney and New Guinea, or Sydney and Queensland, or Melbourne, depending on where we were living, as my family, so my grandma and my nana, they both lived in Sydney. So as children, we were lucky that we got to travel quite a lot, and we got to fly on planes quite frequently. We moved back to Sydney, and for a while we lived in a motel while finding a house. And there were a few things that I remember, but I'm noticing that most of them were bad. But my brother found out that he was allergic to wasps. There was a wasp nest near the front door of our motel room. It was a large room. It was several bedrooms, 2 bedrooms and a living room, so like a long-term room. But there was a wasp's nest at the front door, and they stung him, and he had a reaction to that, so that was something we learnt. But also one day, the apartment across from us burnt down because of a cigarette on the bed. But we weren't home at the time, and we saw smoke and we were worried it was ours. We found a house and we moved in and started a new school, and that was in 1994. And then we moved house again late 90s when I was in high school, but we didn't move from Sydney. We stayed in Sydney. So I think for now that might be the end of my story time about my life. And if you're interested, I can continue from that point and tell you more. If you are, please let me know in the comments below. And I hope you all enjoyed watching and or listening to this video. I hope you're all having a wonderful day, morning or evening, whatever it may be, wherever you are. And I will see you all in my next video.